Good morning and welcome back to the Vitality Project. I'm Dr. Bob. Yesterday we shared this image of the deer in the headlights, which is what happens when any of us are faced with shame, and maybe especially so when we're talking about recovering from active addiction. I promised yesterday to discuss today what might be a far more effective approach to motivating positive change. Let's talk about it for just a moment in terms of the brain. Brain biologists talk about addiction in terms of what they refer to as hypofrontality. That's where the midbrain takes over. It's hypofrontal. It means it's underneath the frontal lobes. The frontal cortex, which is crucial for reasoning, for compassion, and for sound judgment between right and wrong. This goes offline in active addiction. And just as an active addiction, so it does in shame. So when we talked yesterday about the deer in the headlights, shame shuts down the frontal cortex, moves us to the midbrain, and leaves us extremely high for risk for relapse to addiction. So what we need to do instead is find ways, creative ways to recruit the best parts of ourselves in terms of our thinking, our planning, and our committing to change. And all of that happens in the frontal cortex. As we talked about yesterday, the frontal cortex is linked directly to what we're talking about in terms of guilt. So to put this less biologically and more poetically for just a minute, rightful guilt opens up our hearts. Toxic shame shuts them down. So it is that shame paralyzes our moving forward, including in recovery. When shame takes over, you're basically moving into a freeze reaction, and we stay stuck. There is hope, and I believe very strongly in this hope, and I see this hope being manifest every week in the work that I do, leading 10 different groups in 4 different treatment centers here locally. Actually, 5 different treatment centers here locally. And what I find is that if we can create an environment that does what I call unshaming of the active addict, unshaming of the individual in recovery, helping that person to find a connection and community, is that they can then find a will to change. And that is moving from the shame response, which shuts down the frontal cortex, to a guilt response, which holds them accountable, but moves them back into being able to use their best thinking, their best planning, their best committing to behavior change. You may have seen a recent video. It's on YouTube and it's gone viral by the British journalist Johann Hari, H-A-R-I. If you've seen it, you'll recognize this because at the very end, he dramatically asserts this. He says, the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. So that gives us a clue right there to what's going to be required in unshaming the addict who's really earnestly seeking recovery. Come back tomorrow as we unpack this critical key towards healing and towards transformation. I want to thank you for joining me. I'll see you tomorrow.